In February 1987, Tallahassee police made a routine call that turned into one of the most disturbing and most covered up stories in FBI history. 6 disheveled children were found in a park, accompanied by 2 strange men in suits. The kids were filthy, hungry, and didn't even seem to know what electricity was. When questioned, the men said they were teachers traveling with the children to a special school for brilliant minds. But that was just the beginning. What police would soon uncover led straight into the shadows of Washington, D.C., and into a group known only as the Finders. But before we get into that, make sure you like and subscribe and drop a comment below on which FBI vault file you want to hear about next. The Finders were rumored to be part commune, part cult, and part intelligence front. They operated out of Washington, D.C., under the leadership of a mysterious man named Marion Petty. To outsiders, they appeared eccentric, teaching children alternative education and living off the grid. But after that day in Florida, the group's activities were suddenly tied to possible child trafficking, ritual abuse, and even CIA operations. And the most chilling part? When local police tried to investigate, the federal government stepped in and shut the whole thing down. On February 4th, 1987, 2 well-dressed men, Douglas Ammerman and Michael Houlihan, were arrested in Myers Park, Tallahassee, Florida. They weren't your typical suspects. They drove a blue van filled with computer equipment, maps of major cities, a camera, and several children who appeared to be in distress, dirty, hungry, and confused. When the police asked the children about their parents, they said strange things like, "We're being taken to a smart school," and "We will live with the Finders." The 2 men claimed that they were taking the children to a school in Mexico where they would learn to be independent thinkers. But when police contacted the DC Metro Police Department, they discovered something far darker. At a warehouse connected to the Finders, officers found photographs of children, some nude, along with cryptic documents, files labeled Pentagon break-in and explosives, and a room described as being used for ritualistic purposes. There were also telex messages suggesting international trade, travel, and what investigators initially believed could be child trafficking. But the investigation was immediately handed over to the FBI, and within days, the entire narrative had changed. Documents were classified, the evidence seized in Washington mysteriously disappeared, and agents who spoke publicly were told the case was now a matter of national security. The 2 men released without charges. The children returned to the Finders community. And just like that, what began as a routine police call turned into a ghost story wrapped in federal silence. When the Tallahassee arrest first hit the news, headlines screamed about possible child trafficking and ritual abuse. But within a week, those same headlines quietly vanished, replaced by a single sanitized line. No evidence of wrongdoing was found. Here's what really happened behind the curtain. As DC police dug deeper, their investigation was suddenly taken over by the FBI Washington field office. Agents who'd been logging evidence one day found their case files sealed the next. And in a memo dated just weeks later, the Justice Department officially declared the Finders an intelligence operation. That's right, an intelligence operation. The group's founder, Marion Petty, was no random eccentric. He had long-standing ties to military and intelligence personnel. His son worked for the CIA. The warehouse and the farmhouse in Virginia that police once called training compounds, they were now described by federal officials as alternative living experiments. Every reference to abuse or trafficking quietly disappeared. Meanwhile, journalists who tried to follow the story hit a brick wall of no comment. One DC detective went on record years later saying he'd never seen evidence vanish so completely. Even the local Tallahassee officers who had made the arrest were told to stop asking questions. For decades, the finders became an urban legend, a story whispered in conspiracy circles but ignored everywhere else. That is until 2019, when the FBI vault declassified more than 600 pages of documents confirming that the group did exist, and that federal authorities had in fact intervened to shut down the investigation. The files didn't prove satanic ritual or trafficking, but they did prove one thing beyond a reasonable doubt. Someone, somewhere, wanted the finders to be buried. After the case was sealed, the finders quietly faded from public view. No one was ever charged. The children were placed in protective custody and, according to reports, later reunited with their mothers. The group's leader, Marion Petty, lived out the rest of his life in relative peace, still referring to himself as the Teacher of Freedom, until his death in 2004. But the story refused to die. When the FBI declassified the files a decade later, it reignited one haunting question. How does a police investigation into possible child exploitation suddenly become a federal intelligence matter? The vault files revealed not just pages of reports, but blacked out names, missing attachments, and redacted memos. Enough to prove that the case existed, but not enough to explain why it was buried. And here's where the legacy of the finders takes a darker turn. Their methods, communal living, psychological conditioning, coded communications mirror tactics used in Cold War-era intelligence programs like MKUltra and Operation Chaos. Coincidence? Maybe. But for the investigators who saw the files firsthand, the resemblance was too close for comfort. Today, the finders sit at the uneasy intersection of confirmed truth and unanswered suspicion. The facts are real. The arrest happened. The evidence was collected. The FBI took over. What's missing is why. And sometimes in a story like this, what's missing says more than what's left behind. What makes the finders so terrifying isn't the imagery, it's the silence. No jump scares, no ghosts, no monsters hiding in the dark. Just a group of men in suits who walk in, take the evidence, close the file, and then walk away like nothing happened. The scariest part of the story is that it really happened. Police reports exist, the photos exist, the FBI files are public right there in the vault. And yet, after all the investigations, all the classified briefings, not a single person was ever held accountable for this. And here's the chilling part. This is the most requested file in the vault, yet no one talks about it. I've never heard about it at all. Who's asking for this file? And why? Sometimes the monsters don't come from folklore or shadows. Sometimes they work in the daylight, carry badges, and know exactly how to disappear a story. I'm Kyle Fields. This was Stories from the Vault, The Finders. Have a happy Halloween.